Karl Marx, a German economist and political scientist, who lived in the 19th century, looked at capitalism from a more pessimistic and revolutionary perspective. Marx saw instability, struggle, and decline. Marx believed that once the capitalist has set up the means of production, all value is created by the labor involved in producing. In Marx's view, presented in his 1867 book Das Kapital, a capitalist's profits come from exploiting labor and underpaying workers for the value that they are creating. For this reason, Marx couldn't tolerate the notion of a profit-oriented organization. This situation of management exploiting labor underlies the class struggle that Marx saw at the heart of capitalism, and he predicted that the struggle would ultimately destroy capitalism. To Marx, class struggle is not only inherent in the system because of the tension between capitalists and workers but also intensifies over time. Ultimately, in Marx's view, society moves to a two-class system of a few wealthy capitalists and a mass of underpaid, underprivileged workers. Marx predicted the fall of capitalism and movement of society toward communism, in which the workers own the means of production and thus have no need to exploit labor for profit. Clearly, Marx's thinking had a tremendous impact on many societies, particularly on the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in the 20th century. In practice, at least two events undermined Marx's theories. First, in socialist, centrally planned economies have proven far less efficient at producing and delivering goods and services than capitalist systems. Second, workers' incomes have actually risen over time, which undercuts the theory that labor is exploited in the name of profit. If workers' incomes are rising, they are clearly sharing in the growth of the economy. Communism, from Latin communis, common, universal, is a philosophical, social, political, and economic ideology and movement whose goal is the establishment of a communist society, namely a socio-economic order structured upon the ideas of common ownership of the means of production and the absence of social classes, money, and the state. In the 20th century, communist governments advocating this philosophy came into power in parts of the world, first in the Soviet Union with the Russian Revolution of 1917, and then in portions of Eastern Europe, Asia, and a few other nations after World War II. Communist thought has also been traced back to the works of the 16th-century English writer Thomas More. In his 1516 treatise titled Utopia, More portrayed a society based on common ownership of property, whose rulers administered it through the application of reason and virtue. During the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, Vladimir Lenin suggested that a monument be dedicated to More, alongside other important Western thinkers. The Communist Manifesto is an 1848 pamphlet by German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Commissioned by the Communist League and originally published in London just as the revolutions of 1848 began to erupt, the manifesto was later recognized as one of the world's most influential political documents. It presents an analytical approach to the class struggle, historical and then present, and the conflicts of capitalism and the capitalist mode of production, rather than a prediction of communism's potential future forms. The Communist Manifesto summarizes Marx and Engels' theories concerning the nature of society and politics, namely that in their own words, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. It also briefly features their ideas for how the capitalist society of the time would eventually be replaced by socialism. In the last paragraph of the manifesto, the authors call for a forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions, which served as a call for communist revolutions around the world. After the defeat of the 1848 revolutions, the manifesto fell into obscurity, where it remained throughout the 1850s and 1860s. Over the next 40 years, as social democratic parties rose across Europe and other parts of the world, so did the publication of the manifesto alongside them. Marx and Engels wrote a new preface for the 1882 Russian edition, and in it they pondered if Russia could directly become a communist society, or if she would become capitalist first like other European countries. Following the October Revolution of 1917 that swept the Vladimir Lenin-led Bolsheviks to power in Russia, the world's first socialist state was founded explicitly along Marxist lines. When Karl Marx looked into the eyes of history, he saw only a battle between the rich and the poor. He believed that labor was the only true wealth and that capital in no way created wealth. His Communist Manifesto included a 10-point plan. Ironically, the socialist policies of the United States and Europe still followed Marx, but only relented to the simple extent that it allowed private ownership of property, just that the state would heavily tax such property and still regulate it to restrict its use in every possible way that might upset the state. The central thesis of his manifesto was 1. Seizure of all property for the benefit of public purposes. 2. Progressive income tax to even the playing field. 3. Abolish the right to inherit property of any kind. 4. Nationalization of all banks. 5. Confiscate all property of rebels and illegal aliens or emigrants. 6. Nationalization of all industry and production of any kind. 7. Nationalization of the press and all transportation. 8. All people have an obligation to work. 9. Redistribute the population to end the distinction between country and towns, and 10. Establish public schools abolishing child labor. The democratic and so-called free societies adopted most of these policies. Income taxes were progressive, reaching up to 90% in Western economies in the 1960s. Many nations nationalized industry and most public transportation is quasi-governmental. Inheritance taxes reached so high levels that the children who inherited land, property or business had to sell immediately up to inheriting just to pay the imposed taxes. Marx saw the cyclical trends within history and sought to dictate to the economy but did not understand its nature. Marx still failed because human nature cannot be changed.